My name is Sukaina Kubba and I'm based in Toronto, Canada. I work with sculptural drawings, usually referencing textiles and other materials. I moved to Glasgow in 2011 to do a master's in painting. It was an MLit in Fine Art Practice, and I eventually ended up staying there. I worked at the Glasgow School of Art and also sort of the start of my career as an artist. When you enter Gallery 1, on the left-hand side, the first work that you encounter is a piece of tracing paper with drawing on it, and it introduces all the works in Gallery 1. I was in the Atacama Desert on a residency called La Huallaca Current in 2022 in May. I realized that one of the rugs we were sitting on all night happened to be from this region in Iran, so across oceans and deserts and mountains away. I immediately recognized the rug because I had been obsessed with them for 2 years. I was looking them up in museum archives. I had never seen one in person except in the Textile Museum of Canada. So I was kind of tracking them down, and then all of a sudden I'm in Chile in the middle of the desert and one of them pops up. So I figured that coincidence was too much for me not to do something with. I decided to lay out the rug outside where we were staying. I proceeded to trace it. I'd wake up first thing in the morning at dawn when the sun came out till the sun went down. I folded it, took it back with me to Canada. And that summer I was in New York on a residency and proceeded to replicate it using different materials. A while back, I was working a lot with liquid latex that I would sort of tint, kind of layer like you would layer paint very slowly over many days. And I was always interested in creating these works that could lift off the acetate, that become almost like a substrate-less painting. I don't quite know why. Maybe eventually that did lead me to an interest in textiles. And I had always wanted to do something like that with drawing, and I was always trying to think of the right material. I was sometimes doing embroideries, and that kind of was like that, but not quite the same. I was talking about that with a colleague, and she was like, have you heard of 3D pens? It's a pen that takes 3D filament that's used in 3D printers, that's quite ubiquitous now, and feeds it in and it comes out the other end like a glue gun. Part of the process of working with the 3D pen is, even though I'm tracing by hand, these works is something akin to drawing. The pen has its own speed that I cannot control, and it's a steady speed. It gives this kind of rhythm to the work. You can use it to make 3D objects, but I was just using it to draw. It took some time to get used to it, but eventually I was able to trace those lines again in filament and again lift them off, and it was super exciting. I think a bit like finding the rug. It just felt like the right tool for me. When I was working with a lot of latex sheeting, I would order it in rolls. I was sort of interested in how it's packaged, the latex, how it comes in these forms that look like rolled up rugs, and how the material moves a bit like a textile when it's hung. I sometimes would look at the fingerprints on the edges of the latex, because there would be some that were mine, and then some that were maybe the manufacturer, some are people who rolled it. So I was kind of also interested in how it's manufactured, produced in plantations, but also how it kind of travels around, and the history of rubber and latex as well. When I moved to Toronto in 2019, that's where I started really looking at rugs online. So I was looking at rugs that we had in the family. In parallel, actually, I was looking at rugs that were in family photographs. So sometimes there's these photographs from my grandparents' house in Baghdad, and in the backdrop there'd be this beautiful rug that I always remembered. But I also started to look at rugs on online collections. I'm also interested in rugs and how they moved with my family from Baghdad to Abu Dhabi to Montreal, how they would be rolled up and then unfurled to reform the living room or the space. I would always think of nomadic people setting up tents, but the first thing they would set up is the rug to set up the space. The two works that were commissioned by Mercer Union that are here in Gallery 2, they're positioned opposite each other in this space. The first one that I made is made from black TPU filament, and it resembles a drape referencing the history of Mercer Union. It was a cinema 100 years ago. The second work, which is also sheer and is orange and yellow and quite prominent at the end of the gallery, is actually a silk screen with photo emulsion on it. I've always thought of the filament works like stencils. Even when I started making them, I always thought of their potential to be used as maybe printmaking matrices to continue their process. While I was thinking of working with a 3D printer, I still wanted the works to have a quality of a hand drawing. So I was quite intent on making these small drawings, blowing them up, and thinking about how that would be viewed at a distance. I still wanted the works to read like a black and white drawing. And then as you come closer, the texture reveals itself. We started experimenting a lot with the 3D printer, and often you would give the machine the texture to create. And we tried a bit of that, but it always looked very industrial. It looked machine produced, which is fine, but it had this even texture that I didn't like. So then we decided to play around with the machine a bit. So we'd have a flat wall, and then we would program the machine to speed up to the point where it almost starts breaking apart. Not the machine, but like the drawing process breaks apart. And what happens also when you give the machine a flat surface is it starts filling in randomly wherever it wants. So it's almost like the machine is hatching a drawing very quickly. I was thinking about the title of the show. I wanted to come up with something that was more romantic than clever. When we went to the National Museum of Scotland, one of the archivists there was speaking about how these rugs resemble Gardens of Eden or reference them. Also sometimes reference actual gardens, but in some way they're these ideal gardens that had flowers and patterns. And I would interpret the borders as these sort of architectural walls that you're looking at from above at a garden. I would think of rugs being in the house and trying to bring the garden in, but also rugs and being in deserts and creating this oasis or Eden in some ways that exists elsewhere. There's this aspiration in the rug to be something else. I've been working with Craig Mulholland, an artist based in Glasgow, on a project called Alias Domains, where we collaborate mostly on sound and audiovisual works. The project is based virtually on the Cunard, the Queen Mary, which is the main ocean liner that crosses between New York and the UK. During our research into that project, actually Craig had come across the Stoddard Templeton archive, the Stoddard Company, which is a rug manufacturer based in Glasgow that opened early 1800s and closed only in the early 2000s, was manufacturing the rugs for the ships. What they're famous for is a lot of their Art Deco and Art Nouveau designs that they made for rugs, including at the Mitchell Library in Glasgow. So when we started talking about this project at DCA, I thought it'd be interesting to delve into the design archive to see what that could bring about as references. The Stoddard Templeton Design Archive consists of drawings and other documents and artifacts that are housed mostly at Glasgow University that were used by the designers of the rugs as references to design either replicas of Oriental rugs or other rugs that they want to use to replicate for, like, let's say someone's house, or often they were used as inspiration to create new designs. I was interested in that archive because the manufacturer itself, Stoddard Templeton, is one of these companies that were established in Scotland during a time where a lot of the cottage industries and crafts and arts that were made across the empire, like in India, in Persia and other countries, were transferred to Scotland in particular. That transfer established kind of an extension of the colonial project. There was a removal of labor and agency from the people who originally made these works that were a significant part of their trade and livelihood. In some cases, my work does have a lot of this sort of transfer between methods and ways of making. I'm interested in what happens historically as well with these major changes in industry of producing something that was made before in a completely different form and replicating these images in a completely different form. When I started making the 3D filament works, especially the black ones, I always thought of these works as matrices somehow, as possible stencils to make a screen print from or to create a relief. When in January 2024, I came to DCA to do a printmaking residency to produce work for the show with support from the Canada Council for the Arts. I was very interested in bringing these matrices with me and seeing really where we can take the works. And we proceeded to brainstorm and think of what methods could we put this matrix through to produce works that both trace it directly, physically, which was really important for me. There's like that actual physical contact and relationship of the hand to the work. Also made sense to use the product of the digital process to produce silk screens, and also to experiment for the first time for me with laser etching using the laser machine. We also decided to work on embossing the filament work. So we worked again with the black Somerset paper and this beautiful paper called Rosa Spina. And again, it was like this idea of having a direct imprint of the matrix and the filament itself. I had been working on another exhibition in Toronto where I was working with these very colorful filaments, recreating parts of a rug. And I really wanted to have something like that here. I also wanted to acknowledge some of the rug archive that is very expansive and has works from different places and also very colorful, which maybe didn't quite come into the print works. Those were much more about pattern and texture and form. Before I came back here to start working on some of these colorful filament works, they're very figurative. I kind of wanted them to be whimsical and light because there were these images in the works that were quite funny. One of them looked like a duck that's dressed up to be a peacock. I called them late guests because they kind of arrived late, unexpectedly, but hopefully welcome.